Maybe we deal with it. I mean, I still think we're getting
All right, it is time to start class this morning. I appreciate all of those of you who are here. Glad to be here with you all. As you can see from our overhead, we are going to be in Joshua chapter 9 for most of the morning. Also, I should offer a caveat before we get going. Most of the time, my wife Emily offers to run through my PowerPoint and check my spelling and all of that sort of stuff, but this one I sent without that precaution, so any and all errors are fully mine. So there's that. But we've been doing a series of classes for a while now on Sunday mornings that sort of offer a snapshot of various people in Scripture who were flawed in some way, but also still instrumental to the overall story of the Bible and to God's plans. And we've been through some of those now. The men got to pick out the top 3 people they might want to present on, and I am able to present on Joshua 9 this morning. Or Joshua more broadly, I suppose. And the book of Joshua is where I spend a lot of my time these days, and so I'm happy to be able to spend some time here this morning. The person of Joshua, of course, is a whole book of the Bible named after him. But as I'm sure you all know, this isn't where he first appears. Right? Joshua has been a pretty consistent character, actually, so far. I think the first time he actually appears in Scripture is all the way back in Exodus, Exodus 17:9. It's that story where Israel is on its way to Canaan, but they get attacked by the sons of Amalek, right? And there's this whole thing where in order to defeat the nation of Amalek, Moses has to hold his hands up, but he gets tired, and so people got to help him hold his hands up, and so that's a interesting story on its own, but that's where we first meet Joshua, I believe. And then from there, he appears at various points throughout the books of Moses, such as Exodus 24, 33, Numbers 11, Numbers 13, Numbers 14, Deuteronomy 31, and then, of course, I think the last time we see him in the books of Moses is Deuteronomy 34. Moses lays his hands on Joshua, and he becomes Moses' successor. Your verses up there for those who are interested. So Joshua, as we said, he's a pretty consistent member, if you will, throughout the first few books of the Bible. Early in his career, you might say Joshua was sort of like Moses' aide or helper or organizer, or he was kind of a second in command to Moses. But towards the end of Deuteronomy, as we just said, Moses lays his hands on Joshua, and he becomes Moses' successor. Right? He kind of steps into that role. He doesn't quite do all of the same things that Moses did. Right? There's an important distinction there, and Deuteronomy even says so. Right? No prophet arose like Moses, even until this day, or something similar to that. But he does lead Israel at a very important time in their history, as they're entering this land that they've been promised and promised and promised, and now God is giving it to them finally. And our goal with this series of classes is to sort of focus on the way that God used and uses flawed individuals to accomplish his purposes, right? Because that's something that he does often. We tend to gravitate as people towards the stories with heroes who don't have any flaws. Superman, what's his weakness? I guess he has one, but a very famous one. But, we like people who don't have weaknesses, right? We like to see people who are generally better than us do things and that sort of thing. But the Bible doesn't always show us those types of people. The Bible shows us really flawed, really imperfect people. And it also shows us a God who works through them. So it's very different and really interesting in that way. But that being said, we, as far as I can tell, we actually don't have that many stories that focus on just Joshua himself, like we do with Moses or David or other people in Scripture, right? Or Jacob, say. Joshua appears in the book named after him mostly as one with the people of Israel. We see him leading the people and directing the people, but we don't get a lot of individual stories about him. There are a couple for sure, but not like other people in Scripture. And so this morning, it was a little bit difficult because of that to choose what story to focus on with Joshua. And I thought Joshua chapter 9 would be an interesting sort of test case, an interesting time when both Joshua and Israel fail at something or make a flawed decision. So we're going to spend some time there this morning. First of all, I know this is maybe rehashing some stuff. I know you guys know all of this, but I think it's helpful. I'm just going to run some bullet points on reviewing Joshua chapters 1 through 8. Just so we sort of know where the story's been so far. The very first chapter of Joshua, Joshua is commissioned to, there's some other things up here. Joshua's commissioned to take Moses' place by God, to be strong and courageous, especially in chapter 1, verse 8. He's supposed to meditate on the law day and night, right? It's the very same language as Psalm chapter 1, or Psalm 1, which is interesting. Meditation on the law is key for success. Chapter 2 is the story of Rahab, we looked at several weeks ago now, and it sort of sets the precedent for what's going to happen in chapter 9. We'll talk more about that. But Rahab acts boldly, and she's spared because of her confession. And this outsider, right, a Canaanite, kind of becomes a member of the people of Israel. And there are lots of reminders of the Exodus, right? She recalls the Exodus and things that have happened since. Joshua chapters 3 and 4, they cross the Jordan, and then they set up this memorial of 12 stones as this reminder. And it also has a lot of reminders of the Exodus, right? Because they crossed the stream, much like they crossed the Red Sea. Or not a stream, they crossed the Jordan, much like they crossed the Red Sea. In chapter 5, Israel is circumcised for the first time in a while, and then they celebrate the Passover. They eat the first crops, the first time that they eat the yield of the land. That's significant. And then Joshua meets this commander of the armies of the Lord, who's neither for nor against Israel, which is important. Joshua asks him that, and he says neither or no, right? And then chapter 6 is the Battle of Jericho, right? We all know that one. Chapter 7 is kind of important. It's the story of Achan. He steals some of the devoted things from the Battle of Jericho, and him and his whole family, they pay the penalty for that. He is an Israelite who becomes cast outside of his people because of his actions, right? And then chapter 8 is the capture of Ai and that whole story. And so that's kind of where we are at this point. And before we go any further, my thought was we kind of read the chapter together. I'll start us off with the first 4 verses, and then whoever is able and comfortable with reading will just go down until we finish. Actually, we'll stop about here for now, and then we'll break it into two chunks. But I'll start us off, and then we can read together after. It says in verse 1 of chapter 9, "When all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, heard of this," Israel's presence in the land, that is, "they gathered together with one accord to fight Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning. And they went and they prepared provisions, and they took worn out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, with worn out patched sandals on their feet and worn out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and moldy." And Kyle, would you be comfortable reading verses 6 through 8 there? Front, Kyle.
5 through 8. 6. And they went to Joshua at camp. Is that where I need to pick up?
Yes, yeah.
And they went to Joshua to camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us." And the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you are living within our land. How then shall we make a covenant with you?" But they said to Joshua, "We are your servants." Then Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where did you come from?"
Okay, nice. Second, Kyle, would you pick up and read the next few verses to verse 12?
They said to him, "Your servants have come from a very far country because of the fame of Yahweh your God. For we have heard the report of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, king of Heshbon, and to Og, king of Bashan, who were at Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, We are your servants. Now then, cut a covenant with us. This bread of ours was warm when we took it from our provisions out of our houses on the day that we left to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and has become crumbled.'"
Very good. And maybe Charles, could we have you read verses 13 through 15?
"These wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they had burst. These garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel of the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, and made a covenant with them, and let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore to them."
Okay, thank you for all of our readers. That was really good. We'll read the rest of the chapter once we get there, but I wanted to stop here, and we'll begin with our sort of question and discussion portion of the class. This is where I'm really looking for us to give me your opinion here. Good, bad, or ugly, whatever you think here. I think this will be important. So, my first question that I have up here for us, maybe a little obvious, but what is the attitude of the kings listed in Joshua chapter 9, verses 1 through 2? My PowerPoint's a little small. I didn't check that beforehand. I thought I made it big enough. But what do we think their attitude is generally?
They're afraid of the Israelites.
afraid is a good one. Maybe that's their most core emotion in this thing, yeah?
Well, we get from the text that they feel that if they're unified, what they probably weren't prior to that they could defeat the Israelites. But that's
Yeah.
why they all came together.
Right. So they're scared, but also they want to sort of mobilize and band together. That's good. That's really important. Must be a really sort of intimidating force to be able to get that out of so many people, get that reaction. So yeah. What else?
It's probably harder to follow as Jericho, and they knew what could happen to them.
Yeah, that is actually a really great point. Both the Gibeonites and Rahab have a lot more knowledge of things than we might think that they should. They know about stuff that's going on, and they know about stuff that's happened recently, even apparently as recently as Jericho, which kind of, it makes sense, you know, they're living in the same land, and their, you know, word travels just like it does today.
And AI. And what they did is they annihilated everybody.
Right.
They left nothing alive.
Yeah.
So that's really gotten everybody's attention.
Yes.
We're going to have to do something because the edict coming from the destruction of Egypt, and now they come and Amalek, they took and destroyed them, and went to all the kings of Og and Bashan and destroyed them. They're on a destructive path.
Yeah.
They're in the middle of it, in the crosshairs.
Yeah. Israel is kind of, they're on this strange, you know, trajectory as a people, right? They are slaves, or they were slaves not that long ago. And these are the grandchildren or the children of enslaved people, right, in Egypt. And so they were essentially nobodies, right? But God called them out of slavery in Egypt, and He gave them a name, and He adopted them as His people, right? Who's going to serve Him and hopefully be a model to the nations. And so now, a lot of strange things are happening. They are trailblazing a path up to their promised land, and they're winning battles that probably a group of runaway slaves from, you know, maybe the Egyptians' perspective shouldn't have been able to win, right? But of course we know they have God on their side. We had a couple comments up here.
One last thing was in verse 1, it's recorded and recanted the same way as God had sent them on their mission. He talks about the destruction of Hittite, Amorite, Canaanite, Perizzite,
Yep.
Hivite, and Jebusite.
Yeah,
And God is intent on destroying those nations.
right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kings of these countries are saying, I mean, if Jericho's walls, which, you know, everybody knew that Jericho was a well-fortified city. If Jericho's walls couldn't protect them, so, let's see, from the king's perspective, we've got to do something, because we're either gonna sit inside our city and die like everybody else did, or we're gonna go out. I mean, they really have no decision
Yeah,
but to fight, because
right.
either way, they're going to get destroyed.
Right. I'm really glad you're sort of stepping into these Canaanite shoes a little bit. We're going to do some more of that later, but that's good observation. We're going to kind of ask explicitly how they might be feeling later, but that's a good observation too. It may seem like the only way out is to fight, but that's really great. Yeah.
And likely a compounding fear. You don't just have Jericho, yeah, that's obvious, that's a huge defeat, but if Rahab hadn't been around,
Yeah.
but the Egyptians, you know, what happened to the Egyptians, and Jericho was a huge city of commerce and such, so likely that all these other nations would have also heard about Egypt, not just Jericho and the defeats, like these new people where they come from, but also
Right.
the miraculous things that happened prior.
Right.
Like compounding of like, okay,
Yeah.
not just like I'm scared of my boots, but like really,
Right.
you can,
At this point, it's not a fluke, right? They didn't just happen to win a couple skirmishes in the desert on their way up. It's been pretty consistent, right? And now this is really worrying because here you have this group of people on your doorstep and it looks like they're here to conquer you. So I can get that fear as well, yeah.
In chapter 8, verse 26, it gives you the mindset of Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
He was on a mission that God had given them to claim the promised land. It says where Joshua did not draw back his hand, with which he stretched out the spear until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. And that's his mindset going forward. It's not just Ai, it's going to be whoever's in that land that they are supposed to go take them.
Sure, yeah. And so I want to stop here at this point and say there are some laws or teachings earlier back in the Bible I know you guys all know about, but they're kind of undergirding all of this, what's happening in Joshua, right? There are some very specific commands earlier in Deuteronomy where God tells Israel to enter the land and smash their idols and get rid of all that stuff. So that is kind of underneath all of what's going on in Joshua, and that's important. And we'll look at those laws specifically here in a second, is my goal, because those are interesting and they've caused a lot of people a lot of consternation over those. But at any rate, this has been all great stuff. We'll move on to our second question. Like you guys all said, pretty much what I was saying is, you know, when all these kings hear about what is happening in their land, they react in fear, and their immediate reaction is to mobilize for war. Right? They gather together and they want to protect themselves from the Israelites, rather than negotiation, which I don't know. Maybe they didn't think of that, but at any rate, they hear and they're scared and they mobilize for war. Also, this isn't directly related to what we're talking about, but if you wanted to look through the book of Joshua and just pay attention to what happens when the Canaanites hear various things throughout the book, that would be a really good study, because you would find out a lot of really interesting things. Not all of the Canaanites react the same way to the things that they are hearing about Israel, as we're going to see. But our second question, we'll go ahead and move on to this. I maybe gave it away a little bit already. What is the attitude of the kings, does the attitude of the kings in chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, match the attitude of the Gibeonites in chapter 9, verse 3?
No, it doesn't, because the Gibeonites just want to be their servants. They don't want to be killed.
Right.
The kings were banding together to go to war against them.
Right. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a divide here, isn't there? The kings hear, and they react one way in fear, and they, let's gather our buddies and protect ourselves and go to war and get ahead of this thing. But when we get a little bit more particular than that, this Gibeonite population, do they have that same reaction? No.
Well, and it also seems like the Gibeonites knew that Joshua was told in Exodus, like, you're not supposed to cut a covenant with these people, because otherwise, why wouldn't you go to them and just say, hey, we'll be your servants? They knew they were going to have to trick Joshua into doing something that he wasn't allowed to do.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Again, the Gibeonites display knowledge of Israel's covenant that we're not really sure how they got. Maybe they heard it somehow. It's just really interesting that way. But yes, that's a good point. They realize that this is a delicate situation for them, and they're going to have to do something. So, yeah.
Just quickly, the attack that was on Daniel was a very similar one. If we can't find anything wrong with him, let's attack him by his God.
Yeah.
In the same way, these people are attacking Israel in a sleuth type way, in a cunning way, a crafty way.
Yes. Yeah.
And they found enough information to find a way that they could attack Israel.
Yeah. They've displayed their... Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up. Actually, when it says they acted with cunning, that's actually the exact same word that's used to describe the serpent in the garden. Same sort of language, cunning, crafty. which is really, really interesting. That's a great point.
I think also that the king, they wisely decided their strength in numbers if they're going to go to war. But the Gibeons, they decide that there is the greater possibility of deception if they do it alone rather than banding together with all these others, which would make the deception very hard to do.
Yeah. Dead men tell no tales. That's what I think of immediately, right? If you have people in on a conspiracy, the fewer people who know the truth or whatever, the stronger maybe your tale will be, because it's hard to organize that many people, isn't it? And have them all on the same page. So yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah.
What I don't gather from the text is the fact that the Gibeonites knew that they were going to be, slaves. They just knew that they had to
Sure.
come at a different angle
Yeah.
than what the kings were coming at, and so
Sure.
they just gave it their best shot.
Right.
And they knew that to that point of the covenant,
Yeah.
they knew that the God of Israel was stronger than their gods.
Right.
And if they could swear by the God of Israel on an oath, then
Mhm.
it could be a benefit to them.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Maybe they don't know fully what's going to happen, and then they just know it's bad, right? Because they've heard terrible things coming from everyone else, and they know they got to do something. So yeah, that's a great point as well.
I think that's an excellent point, because I hadn't thought about that perhaps the Gibeons, they were thinking that, we're going to try plan A, hopefully have less loss of life of our own, and if that doesn't work, then yeah, we'll band together and we'll go to war, and that'll be our plan B.
Yeah.
We don't know that, but I think
Right.
that might have been excellent thinking on their part.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's always good to have your eggs in more than one basket. So maybe they did some of that. They are cunning people, we're told. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
But too, if Joshua had done what God had said, what you had brought up in chapter 8, meditating on the word and doing all that it said, the law, and that wouldn't have happened either. So
Yeah.
you kind of see a little bit of failure here, not just from Israel, but from specifically
Yeah.
making peace with them.
Yes. Yeah, and we're going to talk more about that too. Because there is some failure involved here in this story. This is why I guess I called it the debacle. Because there is some definite failure on the Israelites and Joshua's part. At any rate, to the question here, no, the Gibeonites, they decide to plan to save themselves, right? Just totally different than the kings. Rather than fight, they're going to hatch a plan to deceive Israel. Right? And we read this already. They get all this old gear, even though they live in the midst of Israel. And they go to Israel and they say, hey, we're from a far country. Make a covenant with us. We're your friends. Because there are specific laws back in Deuteronomy. I probably should have included this here, but specifically, all of the nations in Israel's midst are not allowed to survive. Right? That's kind of the thing. But if nations from outside Israel want to make a covenant with them, they're allowed to offer them terms of peace. Or maybe I'm getting two different laws confused. I know that at the very least, people from outside the area of what was Israel's land were not required to be eradicated, like some of the laws claim here. So that is kind of behind this. They know about this, and so they pretend like they've been on a long journey. They pretend like they've worn out, and they have all this worn out gear, and they go to Joshua and say, hey, we're from a faraway country. Let's cut a deal. Let's make a covenant here. And they succeed, long story short. Israel does engage in doing that. We already talked about this a little bit, but the theme in Joshua of certain groups of people or Canaanites hearing about Israel, and they react really differently. So we've already noted that, but we'll go ahead and move on to our third question for this section. This one I think is maybe a little bit more open-ended, but we'll see. I just want to see what you guys think. Why do we think that God doesn't say anything about this treaty that Israel makes with Gibeon? they weren't really supposed to do this, but they're being deceived. Why do you think God doesn't step in and, whisper in Joshua's ear and say, hey, don't do that, right? Just interested in your thoughts here, because we may never know. But
Joshua probably should have gone to God and talked to him about it instead of just going ahead and presuming that he'd go ahead and make the allegiance with us.
right? Yeah, and that's a good point. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. This is definitely a failure on the people and Joshua's part, but he is their leader, so that's really important.
I think because God allows us to make mistakes. And, I think Joshua probably, through his life, learned from his mistakes. But we don't see God intervening every time. We don't see God intervening when David's on top of the roof looking at Bathsheba.
Right.
Many other times that God could have intervened, but because God uses flawed people so that we have an example that we can do the same.
Right. I'm glad you said that. This is a question that we could kind of blow up to be about the whole of Scripture, right? There are so many instances in which we might ask ourselves, why didn't God stop that, right? Why didn't God step in David's life and say, hey, don't do that. Don't be stupid, Why didn't God step in Solomon's life and whoever, whatever situation you want? But we don't always have those answers.
I think the example for us is if we go to God first,
Mm-hmm.
He helps us.
Yeah.
If we want to go alone, He allows us to go alone. If there are circumstances that get out of control and we are flawed and we sin.
Right.
If we take the opportunity, the advantage that we could have by going to God first, I think God would have given some information to Joshua.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe send a prophet to remind him of the passage. That he sent prophets.
Yeah.
Or is anybody listening?
Yeah.
It's still a thing. So I think the example for us is we need to go to God first.
Right.
If so, then God will be there to help us in whatever difficult situation they have we see later
Right.
in chapter 10, Joshua's mobilized to go help the Gibeonites. And
Yeah.
God says what? I'm with you.
Yeah.
Go.
Right.
And I'm sure at that point in time, Joshua did ask God, is this the thing I need to do?
Right.
God answered him, and I think he would answer us as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have something you want to say? Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I may be jumping way ahead, but I look at Joshua, and I don't consult God on every decision that I make.
Yeah.
And so I look at him and say, man, you should have asked God about that.
Right.
But yet, I don't pray every week about every decision that I'm going to make.
Right.
I feel for Joshua because he thought he was doing what he was commanded to do.
Yeah.
But we see that it ended badly for him.
Right. And I think that's a really important point as well. Okay, so that's our final question for this section. We're going to choose a couple people and knock out the rest of the chapter. Jeremy, do you mind to read chapter 9, verses 16 through 19?
At the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors, and they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the third day. Now the cities were Gibeon, Shephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath-Jearim. And the people of Israel did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. And all the congregation murmured against the leaders. And all the leaders said to the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now you may not touch them."
Good. Could we have Keith, do you mind to read verses 20 through 23 of chapter 9 for us?
This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath that we swore to them. And the leader said to them, Let them live. So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation.
Very good. And then I can round us out here. Verse 24, it says, They answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. So we were in great fear for our lives because of you, and we did this thing. And now we are in your hand. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. This is what he did for them. He saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. But on that day Joshua made them woodcutters and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to continue to this day in the place that he should choose. All right, so we've had the whole story now. We see sort of the aftermath of what's going on.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
That was unexpected. I didn't know that was operating on here. Anyway, okay, we'll move to our next question about this. So we're going to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 20. I'm going to read verses 10 through 18 really quick. It says, When you draw near to a town to fight against it, offer it terms of peace. If it accepts your terms of peace and surrenders to you, then all the people in it shall serve you at forced labor. But if it does not accept your terms of peace and makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword. You may, however, take as your plunder the women, children, livestock, and everything else in the town, all its spoil. You may enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall treat the towns that are very far from you, which are not towns of those or of these nations here. I think that's where I'm getting that part from. But as for the towns of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving to you as inheritance, you must not let anything that breathes remain alive. Indeed, you shall annihilate them, all the peoples, and we'll just stop there for that one. So there's the command, right? This is kind of a big part of what's undergirding much of what happens in Joshua. Now, if you had been in the Gibeonite shoes, we've already kind of discussed this a little bit, knowing this command, like they seem to do, what would you have done, right? What is your reaction to this situation? There's no right or wrong answer, obviously, but
Again, you had Gibeonites had two options: be destroyed or deceive and become slaves.
yeah. It's pretty grim, it seems like, for them. So they decide to make the most of it, which is interesting.
Well, even it seems that they did have some knowledge of
Yeah.
God's law.
Yeah.
And they took advantage of you want to call it a slight rule change. As long as you don't live in the land, you have the
Yeah.
opportunity to make a deal.
Yeah,
And so they said, well, we live in the land, but we will try to make a deal.
right.
They had nothing to lose at that point in time.
Right. It's a little bit of it's not quite a loophole, but it's kind of feels like a little bit of a loophole here. And every so often, my phone will do this thing where it wants to do an update. And I have to agree to the terms and conditions. Who reads those? Not me. I just hit agree, and I don't look at I probably should, right? I should read those and be informed about what I'm agreeing to. But I don't. And so maybe this is a little bit like that. They realize the situation that they're in, and so the Gibeonites decide to go read those terms and conditions, right? And they decide to make the most of it. So, yeah. Well, if that's all we have for that question, we will move on to the second one. Are the responses of the Israelite leaders and the Israelite people the same in verses 18 through 21? Kyle is saying no. That's correct, yeah.
The people are really upset with the leaders.
Yeah,
Because they know the law as well. And, there's discord in the family.
yeah. Not only do they seem to know the law, they've just all had it read to them. Remember in chapter 8 of Joshua, they gather on the two mountains, and like Moses had asked them to do, Joshua read it for them. So, yeah.
Well, I can almost hear the Israelite people saying, who are these leaders that you got deceived by these people? Who is leading us?
Yeah. They seem to really begrudge that decision to keep the Gibeonites around, or they at least seem to be mad at the elders for getting them into this mess. Right? They're a little bit disgruntled there. Now I want to look, we're going to go even farther back in Deuteronomy to chapter 7. I'm going to read 5 verses here, the first 5 verses. It says, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you're about to enter and occupy and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, all those names, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you, and when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, you must utterly destroy them, make no covenant with them, and do not show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons, for that would turn away your children from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and you would be destroyed and would destroy you quickly. But this is how you must deal with them: break down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred poles, and burn their idols with fire." Okay? Just knowing that and having that as context, I want to ask you this. You guys all have it on your papers, I think. We've kind of been discussing this already. Was Israel's decision to let Gibeon live right or good or what have you? You're free to vacillate on this one if you express your opinion here.
We were afraid that they had made a covenant in the Lord's name and that God would punish them. Because in Leviticus 19:12 says, "You shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of your God by your word." So I think that played a big role. And so they were right because they had promise.
Yeah. I'm actually really glad you brought that up too, because that, I think, is key to this whole thing. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, maybe. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but we'll try to mention it. Someone over here?
Israel has put themselves in a decision where they can't do right. They either have to go back on their oath because they made an oath that they weren't supposed to make,
Yep.
or they have to kill all people.
Yeah. And I would just say to that, don't we find ourselves in these compromising positions all the time? I do stupid things, and I realize what I'm left with right now is to make the best of a bad situation. And it's very real to life, it seems like to me. But yeah,
When I look at it, it's one of the few covenants they actually kept. And I think they only kept it because it was so close and top of mind to them. Like it just happened.
yeah.
All the other covenants that they made with God, they broke, they didn't follow, but time was the factor. And it was so close, they were like, oh, this is really blatant. We gotta keep, we actually should keep
Right.
this one.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of goes with what Norma was saying. This is one of the few covenants they kept, and I think part of the reason is because we make oaths about things all the time, just lifely. It doesn't matter to us. We'll swear whatever, whenever. It wasn't the same, right? To swear something in front of a deity had huge implications. It was like swearing in a court of law. Like you guys know this. So to go back on a promise would have been worse than, not following through on that. Yeah.
I kind of think they should kill them, because it's kind of like, well, you think about like marriage, it's like, Moses gave a decree, said it was okay,
Yeah.
but Jesus says in the beginning it was not so. And so, I don't know, my mindset would go, well, what was said first?
Yeah.
God said destroy these people. I don't know, maybe that's.
Yeah, no,
Where
that.
did Leviticus come from? Maybe it was the covenant, but I think
Yeah.
they would, I don't know, I would have been the one to just.
Yes. And it seems like the people felt the same way too. So there's some dialogue here in this chapter about what was the right thing to do. We had Jeremy, you had a hand up?
I just think it demonstrates that sometimes there's a kind of hierarchy of principles, that there are some sins that can be undone.
Yeah.
And in this case, as Carl said, it couldn't be undone, so the choice is really which principle to follow.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a good point as well. And we had some comments up here. Yeah.
I was going to say, they could have said, well, the Gibeonites lied to us in the first place, telling us that they were from far
Right.
So that made the deal null and void, because you started out with a lie.
Right. Yeah, there is probably a precedent for both.
They've already done one thing wrong, and now if they violate God's law, they're doing a second thing wrong.
Right.
And so, not necessarily the lesser of two evils, in my mind, it's like, stop.
Right.
We've gone too far, but let's don't keep
The
piling on.
yeah. The damage has been done.
We make that decision, and then we might, like Mary said, oh, well, they did it wrong, so we're just gonna violate it again.
Right.
And so now you're in double jeopardy. You're making two mistakes instead of just making one.
Yeah.
I think, like we said, they have a choice to make here, and I think they made the choice that would help them sleep at night. But in reality, it was worse for the children of Israel, because like God said, you have these people that are not supposed to be here, living in the land, and it's going to corrupt the nation. And so I think either way, both ways we could have read this story and God could have made it work.
Yeah.
But it seems like Joshua and the leaders chose the thing that would let them sleep at night after they've already messed up.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think what I want to introduce to this discussion now is what we've really been only looking at this one case in Scripture. And I think Joshua 9 is meant to be read along with Joshua 7 and Joshua 2, right? Other cases where things happen that shouldn't happen. Rahab is saved because of her confession, right? She's very similar to the Gibeonites, her situation. She doesn't do it by trickery. But by the laws of Deuteronomy, she should have been exterminated, and she's not, right? Her and her whole family live. And in Joshua chapter 7, we have the exact opposite happen, right? We get this huge, long chunk of text describing Achan's lineage. He is a purebred Israelite, an Israelite of Israelite, and he's executed along with his family at the end of the chapter because of his actions, right? And so I think there's maybe a little bit of a back and forth throughout the book of Joshua as to what makes someone Israelite. Is it just your ethnicity in this case? Maybe. But there's also a sense in which devotion to God is what's important, because we see other people offer that who should have been exterminated and they aren't, like Rahab. But at any rate, we'll talk. We don't have very much time left, but there's maybe one last thing we have to say about that. Let's see what I have time for. I have a couple takeaways up here listed on the paper, and up here we'll maybe walk through those just a bit. But I will say it was wrong for sure to not inquire of Yahweh. I don't think anyone really disagrees with that. But they don't seem to be called out for making or for honoring this treaty made in a tight situation with Gibeon. The evidence for that being Joshua 10. Later, Gibeon says, "Hey, we're in trouble. Can you help us out?" And Israel says, "Yep, we're with you." And like you said, God gives the stamp of approval and says, "Go help them. You got this." So it is an interesting situation there. But I also want to bring up, maybe right before we end here, is that this time of conquest, as we enter the land, it's kind of like two ends of a magnet, a little bit. That's how I think of it. Israel is just completing the final stage of their exodus, really, right? They've been brought out as a people. God has brought them out and created them a people, give them a set of teachings that they're to live by, and an identity and a purpose. And now the final part of that is to give them this land, right? To act and to live out this law of God. And if you pay attention, we're also told that the Canaanites at various points hardened their hearts. Right? Who else hardens their heart in Scripture? Most famously, Pharaoh. Yes. And that's important because the conquest is really just kind of like the beginning of the end of this stage of their history. And then they're going to go on to have judges for a while, and that'll be a new stage, and then they'll have kings, right? And so this is maybe just the wind down of the Exodus. But going back to the question of whether Israel was right or not, on the one hand, they made this treaty. Joshua allowed them to make this treaty without really thinking, without asking God, right? He should have done that. But after they'd done it, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like I said, we tend to swear things all the time in our day, and it's rather light and inconsequential. Probably shouldn't be, right? But for an ancient Israelite, entering a covenant with a deity was binding. I mean, there was no going back. I think of Jephthah, right? How terrible a promise that was. And he didn't go back. He didn't feel like he could. But at any rate, so there's that element to it.
Ethan?
Yeah.
In that same line, the reason that God said that they were to be annihilated was that they would intermarry, and their gods, when they were to go in, they were to
Yes.
destroy their gods. So maybe part of that faith that the Gibeonites were going to show would be that all of their gods would be destroyed.
Yeah.
And they needed to come to worship only the one true living God.
Yes. I love...
That would allow the Israelites to take away the temptation that God is concerned about.
Yes. I love that comment, and that's going to be kind of where we end today. I want to make your point, and then I want to make one final one, is we do see that, the Gibeonites are given this place as drawers of water and hewers of wood. Doesn't sound very glamorous from the text, but when you think about it, regular Israelites don't even have that much access to the temple, right? They're not in contact with the holy that often. So it may seem, like backwards logic, but this is actually not that bad of a position. This is rather honored to be able to serve the house of Yahweh in this way. So there's that. And then I want to just go think back to Genesis chapter 12, right? When God comes to Abram and he says, you and your family, you're going to be a blessing to the nations. And through you, I'm going to bless other people. And if you really think about it, even though the circumstances were much less than ideal here, that's exactly what happened. Is it not? They made this covenant they shouldn't have made. They decided to honor that covenant made in a less than ideal circumstance. And because of that, the Gibeonites aren't destroyed. And they're blessed by Israel in this sort of way, in a sense.
Reminds me of the idea of not making a pledge to someone that you don't know.
Yeah.
Basically, it's the same kind of thing, because then you're beholden to that person.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened here. They were beholden to the Gibeonites.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And we'll end with that right now. I have a couple other ones up here, some takeaways that I thought were interesting. But I think probably the one I would end with, the one I think is most important, is even if it's in sort of a less than ideal way, the Gibeonites, or Israel becomes a blessing even to these Gibeonites. And so maybe we can find ways to do the same. Not mimic their bad stuff, but and that's where I'll leave you. Someone else will take the class next week. Thank you guys for your attention. But I see children and teens coming down, and it's time to wrap it up. But thank you guys.